He almost threw it away. That's the part nobody knows. The note had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 2 days, folded in half, crayon marks bleeding through the paper. His daughter had handed it to him on a Tuesday morning while he was rushing to get his boots on, already late, already calculating whether he'd make it to the time clock before 7. "Give this to your boss, Daddy." He'd said okay without looking up. He stuck it in his jacket pocket and forgot about it. 2 days later, getting ready to toss an old receipt, he felt the paper, pulled it out, almost dropped it in the trash with everything else. He didn't. He's not sure why. Maybe it was the purple crayon heart she'd drawn on the outside. Maybe it was the way she'd written important on the fold, spelled wrong, 7-year-old handwriting, but the intention unmistakable. He put it in his lunch bag instead, and walked into the building that would never feel the same again. Daniel Mercer had worked at Callaway and Reed for 9 years. Not 9 years of climbing. Not 9 years of promotions and performance reviews and corner offices getting closer. 9 years of the same floor, the same routes, the same cart, the same invisible boundary between the people who made decisions in this building and the man who cleaned up after them. He wasn't bitter about it. That matters. Some men carry resentment the way others carry wallets, always there, always within reach. Daniel wasn't built that way. He'd made a choice somewhere around year 3, quiet and unannounced, the kind of choice nobody witnesses but that shapes everything that comes after. He decided that dignity wasn't something this job could give him or take from him. It was something he brought through the door every morning at 6:47. He knew which elevator made a sound on the way up but not on the way down. He knew the conference room on 9 leaked cold air from the window frame on the left, and that whoever sat nearest to it always left early on winter afternoons. He knew the 4th floor bathroom light took exactly 3 seconds to catch, and that if you didn't know that, you'd spend those 3 seconds thinking it wasn't going to come on at all. He knew which executives arrived before sunrise and which ones arrived after the coffee was already made. He knew the ones who said good morning and meant it, and the ones who said it without looking up. He noticed everything. Nobody noticed him. That's not a complaint. That's just what it was. A man can be essential and invisible at the same time. Load-bearing walls don't get thanked for holding the ceiling up. They just do it. Every day. Without asking whether anyone noticed. Daniel had been doing that for 9 years. At home, though, it was different. At home, there was Sophie. Sophie, who was 7 years old and operated under the firm conviction that her father was the most important person in any room he walked into. Sophie, who saved the seat next to her on the couch every evening even when she wasn't sure what time he'd get home. Sophie, who asked him every single night, not occasionally, not when she remembered, but every single night, "Did anything good happen today, Daddy?" He always found something. Even on the days that were long and cold and invisible, he always found something to tell her. A bird that had gotten into the lobby and took 20 minutes to coax back out. A janitor's closet that smelled like cedar for no reason anyone could explain. A paper crane someone had left on the windowsill of the 7th floor, perfectly folded, no note attached. He brought these things home like others bring flowers. Sophie collected them like they were rare. She didn't know what her father did exactly. She knew he worked in a big building. She knew he left before she woke up most days and came home smelling like cleaning supplies and effort. She knew he was tired in a specific way, not the complaining kind of tired, but the quiet kind, the kind that sits in the jaw and the eyes and doesn't ask for anything. She was 7, but she was watching. Children always are. The note made it into the building on a Thursday. Daniel almost left it in his locker. That was his first instinct, fold it back up, bring it home, tell Sophie he'd delivered it, spare everyone the awkwardness of a maintenance worker walking up to the executive floor with a crayon drawing from his kid. He knew how that would look. He'd worked here long enough to understand the unspoken architecture of a place like this. There were floors you belonged on and floors you serviced. There were conversations you were part of and conversations you were the subject of. There were doors that opened when you pushed them and doors that were technically unlocked, but still somehow not for you. He knew all of that. And yet, he took the elevator to 12. He told himself it was because Sophie would ask. She always asked about the things she cared about, and she'd cared about this enough to spend what must have been an entire afternoon on it. The hearts, the house, the small crayon figures holding hands in the bottom right corner, the word important written on the fold with the kind of concentration that leaves pencil marks on the table underneath. He couldn't lie to her about something she'd worked that hard on. So he went to 12. The executive floor had a particular quality of silence that the other floors didn't. Not the silence of emptiness, it was always occupied, always in motion, but the silence of control. Of people who had learned to keep their voices calibrated to the room. The carpet was thick enough to absorb sound. The lighting was warmer. Even the air felt different, the way air feels in places where decisions get made. Daniel didn't belong here, and he knew it. He stopped at the assistant's desk outside the main office. A woman named Patricia, mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, who had worked for Mr. Calloway for longer than Daniel had worked in the building. She looked up when he approached, not unkindly, but with the particular attention of someone whose job includes managing who gets through. "Can I help you?" Daniel held out the note. "My daughter made this. She wanted me to give it to Mr. Calloway." Patricia looked at the folded paper, at the crayon heart on the outside, at the word important in a child's handwriting. She looked at Daniel. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity, something quieter than that. Something that looked, if he was reading it right, like recognition. "I'll make sure he gets it," she said. Daniel nodded, thanked her, took the elevator back down to 7 and went back to work and didn't think about it again. Or tried not to. The mind has a way of circling back to the things it dropped off somewhere and can't retrieve. He found himself, more than once that afternoon, wondering what Sophie had written. He hadn't opened it. It was her note, not his. Whatever she'd wanted to say, she'd said it directly, the way children do before they learn to filter themselves for an audience. He was almost afraid to know. By 4 o'clock he had convinced himself that nothing would come of it. Patricia would add it to a pile of things that never quite made it to the desk, or it would make it to the desk and get glanced at and set aside. Mr. Calloway was a man who ran 3 divisions and sat on 2 boards and had an assistant whose job was to manage the distance between him and everything that wasn't essential. A crayon drawing from a maintenance worker's 7-year-old daughter was not essential. Daniel clocked out at 4:30, took the bus home. Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework, and when she looked up and saw him, the first thing she said was, "Did you give it to him?" "I did," Daniel said. "What did he say?" "I don't know yet, Bug. These things take time." She nodded, satisfied in the way children are when they trust that the right thing is already in motion. Daniel made dinner, helped with the homework, read 2 chapters of the book they'd been working through together at bedtime, kissed her forehead when she fell asleep. He stood in the hallway for a moment after. Quiet house, hum of the refrigerator, the particular stillness of a home that is small but held together. He thought about the note. He thought about what a 7-year-old sees that the rest of us have learned not to look at. Then he went to bed. He didn't hear anything on Friday. He hadn't expected to. He told himself that on the bus ride in, standing in the cold with his collar up, breath visible in the early morning air. He told himself that on the elevator ride up to 7, cart already loaded, the day already mapped out in his head the way it always was. He told himself that while he worked, moving through the floors with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done something so many times it has become its own form of thought. He didn't expect anything. But he listened differently that day. That's the honest part. He wasn't waiting. Waiting implies a kind of stillness he didn't have room for, but some part of him had become slightly more attuned to the sounds of the 12th floor. The elevator bell, footsteps on thick carpet, the particular acoustic signature of a door opening onto that specific hallway. Nothing. By lunch he had let it go, or told himself he had. He ate in the basement break room the way he always did. The table near the window that looked out onto the loading dock. Coffee from the machine that was one setting too bitter but reliable. Delvin, the night supervisor, was finishing his shift and sat across from him for 20 minutes, talking about nothing in particular, his daughter's soccer game, a parking ticket he was contesting, a movie he'd seen half of and fallen asleep during. Daniel listened and laughed in the right places and felt, not for the first time, that this table was the realest place in the building. Not 12, not the glass conference rooms, not the offices with the city views. This table, this coffee, this man talking about a parking ticket like it was the most important thing in the world, because right now, for him, it was. That was Friday. Saturday he was off. He took Sophie to the park in the morning, the one 3 blocks over with the climbing structure she still loved even though she'd told him twice recently that she was getting too old for it. She climbed it anyway. He sat on the bench and watched her and felt the particular ache of a parent watching a child be unself-consciously happy, that bittersweet awareness that you are witnessing something that has an expiration date, that one day she will walk past this park and not even think about stopping. He took a picture. He always took pictures. That afternoon they made pancakes for dinner because Sophie had decided that pancakes were better at night and Daniel had no argument against that logic. They watched a movie she'd already seen 4 times and he'd never seen at all. He fell asleep on the couch before it ended. She put a blanket on him. He found it when he woke up at 10, the house quiet, Sophie already in bed, the blanket tucked around him with the precise care of a child who had watched someone do that for her and decided to return it. He sat with that for a while. Sunday was groceries and laundry and the slow, comfortable rhythm of a weekend that doesn't ask anything of you. Sophie helped fold clothes, which meant the folding took 3 times as long and half the shirts ended up in shapes that defied geometry, and Daniel let her do it anyway because the conversation they had while doing it, about her friend Margot's new dog, about whether clouds have feelings, about what job she might want when she grew up, was worth any amount of refolding. "Maybe I'll work in a big building like you," she said, matching socks with the focused expression of someone performing surgery. "You can work anywhere you want," he said. "I know." She handed him a sock. "But I like buildings. They feel like they're holding something." He looked at her. 7 years old. He didn't say anything, just took the sock and added it to the pile. Monday morning came the way Monday mornings do, not suddenly, but inevitably, the weekend folding itself away like something that was never meant to stay. Daniel was up at 5:45, boots on by 6:15, out the door into air that had gotten colder overnight. He didn't think about the note on the bus. He thought about Sophie saying buildings feel like they're holding something. He thought about that all the way in. He clocked in at 6:47, loaded his cart, took the elevator to 7. At 8:14, Patricia from the 12th floor called down to the maintenance office. She asked if Daniel Mercer was working today. The woman who took the call was Rosa, the morning dispatcher, who had worked the maintenance desk for 11 years and had the particular competence of someone who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. She walked down the hall to where Daniel was working without any particular urgency, the way she delivered all information, like weather reports, factual and unhurried. "Patricia from 12 is asking for you." Daniel stopped. "For me specifically?" "By name." He set down what he was doing, took the elevator to 12. The doors opened onto that carpet, that silence, that air that felt like it had been conditioned to behave. Patricia was at her desk. When she saw him, she stood up, which was not something he had expected, and there was something in her expression he couldn't immediately read. Not pity, not discomfort, but something that sat closer to the face people make when they have witnessed something they are still processing. "Mr. Calloway would like to see you," she said. Daniel heard the words, understood them individually, had a brief moment where his mind tried to arrange them into a shape that made sense. "Is everything all right?" Patricia looked at him with those reading glasses on their chain and said, quietly, "Yes, I think so. I think more than all right." She walked him to the office door, knocked twice, opened it. Richard Calloway was standing at the window. Not sitting behind his desk the way powerful men sit when they want you to understand the geography of the room. Standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city with the posture of a man who had just put something down that had been heavy. He turned when Daniel entered. Daniel had seen this man dozens of times over 9 years. In hallways. In elevators. In the lobby on busy mornings when the whole building was in motion. He had cleaned this office more times than he could count. Vacuumed that carpet, wiped those windows, emptied that wastebasket without ever once being in this room as anything other than the person responsible for it. He didn't know what he expected. He didn't expect what he saw. Richard Calloway's eyes were red. Not the red of anger, the red of someone who had been crying and had stopped and was still somewhere inside it. He was holding the note. Sophie's note. The crayon hearts and the small house and the stick figures holding hands in the bottom corner. The word important on the fold. All of it. He held it the way you hold something you don't want to put down. "Mr. Mercer," he said. His voice was steady, but it had the quality of something that had recently been otherwise. "Your daughter wrote me a letter." Daniel nodded. "I know. I'm sorry if it was." "Don't apologize. It wasn't sharp. It was firm in the way of someone who means it completely. Please don't apologize for this." He looked down at the note, then back up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you read it?" "No," Daniel said. It was hers to send. Something moved across Richard Calloway's face at that. Something that looked like it confirmed something he had already suspected but needed to hear out loud. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She wrote about you." Daniel waited. "She wrote," he stopped, looked at the note again, read from it directly, and his voice, which had been steady, did something at the end of the first sentence that it couldn't quite take back. She wrote, "My daddy works so hard and he never complains. He says his job is important because buildings need people who care. I think he is the most important person in your building. I don't think you know that yet. I wanted to tell you because somebody should." The office was very quiet. The city moved outside the window, indifferent and continuous. Daniel stood in the middle of that carpet, on that floor where he had never stood as anything other than the man responsible for its cleanliness, and felt something shift inside him, not loudly, not with any announcement, but with the slow, irreversible movement of something that has been leaning for a long time finally finding its position. He didn't cry, but it was close. Richard Calloway folded the note carefully, set it on his desk with a deliberateness that said it was not going in a drawer. "I've been in this building for 22 years, he said. "I know the names of everyone on my executive team. I know the names of our top clients. I know the names of the people who appear in the reports that cross my desk." He paused. "I did not know your name until Friday." He let that sit. "I want to change that, starting today. But that's a conversation for later this week if you're open to it." He looked at Daniel directly. "Right now I just wanted to say thank you. Not for the note, though I'll keep this for the rest of my life." He touched it once, lightly. "For raising someone who sees people. That's not something you can teach. That's something you live in front of them." Daniel took the elevator back down to 7. He stood inside it for the full ride without pressing anything, just standing there while the numbers changed, and when the doors opened he walked back to his cart and stood in front of it for a moment before picking up where he had left off. He finished the floor. That's the thing nobody tells you about moments that change something. They don't stop the day. The floor still needed finishing. The supply closet on 8 needed restocking. The lobby needed a second pass before the afternoon foot traffic built up. Life doesn't pause for its own turning points. It just keeps its schedule and expects you to keep yours. So he kept his. But something was different in the keeping of it. He couldn't have named it precisely. It wasn't pride exactly. He'd had that already, quiet and private, the kind that doesn't need an audience. It wasn't relief, though there was some of that too. It was something closer to the feeling of being seen after a long time of moving through rooms unnoticed, not celebrated, not promoted, not transformed. Just seen. There is a difference between those things that most people don't think about until they've experienced the absence of one of them for long enough. Daniel had experienced that absence for 9 years. One letter from a 7-year-old had walked into a room he'd never been invited into and said his name out loud. He thought about that while he restocked the supply closet on 8. He thought about it while he ate lunch at the table by the loading dock, alone today because Delvin had left early. He thought about it on the elevator ride down at the end of his shift, cart empty, building winding down around him the way it always did in the late afternoon. The particular quality of an office building at 4:30, when the energy shifts from accumulation to release, people moving toward exits with the loosened posture of obligations temporarily set down. He thought about what Calloway had said. A conversation for later this week. He didn't let himself build too much on that. He'd been around long enough to know that things said in emotional moments don't always survive the return to normal temperature. A man could be genuinely moved on a Monday morning and still be back inside his usual architecture by Wednesday. Daniel wasn't cynical about it, just honest. He would wait. He would show up. He would do what he always did. And if something came of it, it would come. On the bus home he sat by the window and watched the city move past in the gray late afternoon light. The same route he'd taken for 9 years. The same stops. The same faces that weren't quite familiar but had become, over time, a kind of ambient company. He thought about Sophie. He thought about her at that kitchen table with her crayons, constructing an argument for his worth with the tools available to her. Hearts and houses and stick figures and the word important spelled with the confidence of someone who knows what she means even if the letters aren't cooperating. He thought about her deciding on her own, without asking permission, that somebody should say something. He thought about how long he had worked in that building without once considering saying something himself. Not out of defeat, out of the same dignified acceptance he'd made his peace with years ago. The understanding that some distances are structural and not personal, and that a man can live well within them. But Sophie hadn't accepted that distance. She was 7. She didn't know the floor you were supposed to stay on. She didn't know about structural distances or unspoken architectures or the careful geography of buildings where some people made decisions and others cleaned up after them. She just knew her father worked hard and nobody had told his boss yet. So she told him. Daniel got off at his stop, walked the 4 blocks home in the cold, let himself in. Sophie was at the kitchen table, homework spread out, purple crayon in her hand, the same shade he noticed as the heart on the outside of the note. She looked up. Did anything good happen today, Daddy? He sat down across from her. He thought about Richard Calloway standing at that window with red eyes, holding a piece of folded paper like it was something he intended to keep for the rest of his life. He thought about Patricia's expression when she walked him to that door. He thought about 9 years of that building, and one afternoon on the 12th floor, and a 7-year-old who had decided that somebody should say something. Yeah, Bug, he said. Something really good happened today. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her homework. He sat there for a moment longer, watching her color. The purple crayon moved across the page with total confidence. She didn't know what she had done. That was the most extraordinary part. She hadn't done it to change anything. She hadn't done it because she understood the architecture of that building or the distance between floors or the weight of being invisible for 9 years. She'd done it because it was true and because somebody should say it and because she was 7 and hadn't learned yet that some truths are supposed to stay quiet. Daniel was glad she hadn't learned that yet. He hoped she never would. There's something we don't talk about enough. We talk about the people who change the world in large invisible ways, the ones with stages and titles and names that travel. We build narratives around them because narratives need protagonists and protagonists need scale. They need to be doing something large enough to justify the story. But there is another kind of change. The kind that happens in a single room on an unremarkable Monday morning. The kind that doesn't make the news and doesn't need to. The kind where one person finally gets called by their name in a building they've given 9 years to, because a child with a purple crayon decided the silence had gone on long enough. That kind of change doesn't look like much from the outside. From the inside, it feels like a window opening in a room that had been closed for a very long time. Daniel knew that feeling now. And here's what I want to say to you directly, before we go any further. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us every day. Not because we have something to sell you, not because we'll promise you transformation or a better version of yourself by Friday, but because what we're doing right here, in stories like Daniel's, in the quiet places where real things happen to real people, this is what we come back to, every day. The moments that don't make headlines but make lives. If that's what you're looking for, we're here. Now let me tell you what happened on Thursday. Calloway's assistant called the maintenance office at 9:15. Daniel was on 6 when Rosa found him. He took the elevator to 12 for the second time that week. And this time when the doors opened he noticed that his hands were slightly less steady than usual, which he acknowledged and set aside the way he set aside most things that weren't useful. Patricia smiled when she saw him, a real one. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Daniel would not describe it as a negotiation, because that word implies two sides with competing interests, and what happened in that room didn't feel like competition. It felt more like an accounting. A quiet inventory of 9 years taken honestly, without the defensiveness that sometimes accompanies that kind of reckoning. Calloway had done his homework. He knew Daniel's record, the attendance, the performance reviews, all of them strong, none of them ever acted upon in any material way. He said that plainly, without dressing it up. He said, I looked at your file and I want to be honest with you about what I found and what I didn't do with it. Daniel respected that. They talked for 40 minutes about the building, about the maintenance operation, about the things Daniel had noticed over 9 years that nobody had thought to ask him about. The elevator on 4, the window on 9, the supply chain inefficiencies he'd worked around so long they'd become invisible. Things that cost the building money and time that could have been addressed years ago if anyone had thought to ask the man who knew this building better than anyone else in it. Calloway listened the way people listen when they're actually listening, not waiting for their turn, but building on what they were hearing, asking the kind of follow-up questions that tell you the information is landing somewhere real. At the end of the meeting, he offered Daniel a role in facilities management. Not maintenance. Management. A different floor. A different title. A salary that reflected what 9 years of institutional knowledge was actually worth. Daniel said he needed to think about it. Calloway nodded like that was exactly the right answer. On the bus home that evening, Daniel sat by the window again. Same route, same stops, same gray sky pressing down on the city. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. He thought about Sophie's question, did anything good happen today? He thought about how many times over 9 years he had searched for the small true answer to that question, the bird in the lobby, the cedar smell, the paper crane on the windowsill, and brought it home like it was enough. It had been enough. That was the thing he kept coming back to on the bus. It had genuinely been enough. Not because he had no ambition, not because he had accepted less than he deserved, but because he had found a way to be whole inside a life that the world would have called insufficient. He had built something real in the space available to him, a daughter who saw people, a reputation built on showing up, a kind of integrity that didn't require an audience. And now the audience had shown up anyway. Not because he'd performed for it. Because his daughter had told the truth. He took the job. Not immediately. He thought about it for 2 days the way he thought about everything that mattered, quietly, without rushing, turning it over in the mornings before Sophie woke up, sitting with the weight of it until he understood what it actually was. It wasn't a reward. That's what he needed to be sure of before he said yes. He needed to know that he wasn't taking it because he finally felt seen, because the danger in that is real, making permanent decisions based on temporary feelings, building a new life on the foundation of someone else's moment of recognition. He took it because it was right, because 9 years of knowledge had value that had been sitting uncollected, because the work he would do in that role was work he was genuinely equipped to do and had been for longer than anyone had noticed. That was the right reason. He said yes on a Wednesday. That evening he sat Sophie down at the kitchen table, the same table where she had drawn hearts and houses with a purple crayon, the same table where they folded laundry and did homework and ate pancakes at night because she had decided they were better that way, and he told her what had happened. Not all of it. She was 7. But enough. He told her that he was going to have a new job in the same building, that her note had meant something to the man who ran the building, that sometimes when you tell the truth simply and without fear, it lands in places you never expected. She listened with the focused attention she gave to things that mattered to her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I knew he didn't know." "How did you know?" He shrugged, the way children shrug when the answer seems obvious to them and they're being patient about it. "Because you never told him, and somebody had to." Daniel looked at his daughter. 7 years old, purple crayon still faintly on her fingers from whatever she'd been working on before dinner. Completely certain that the right thing to do when something true is going unspoken is simply to say it. He didn't explain to her what she had done. He didn't give it a name or a lesson or a moral. She didn't need any of that. She had acted from the clearest possible place. She loved her father, she believed in him completely, and she had noticed a gap between what was true and what the world knew, and she had closed it with the tools she had. Crayons and paper and 7 years of watching. That's all it had taken. There is something in that worth sitting with. We spend so much of our lives calculating the right moment to say the true thing, waiting until we have the right words, the right room, the right relationship, the right level of permission. We learn, over time, to measure the distance between what we know and what we're allowed to say, and most of us learn to stay on the right side of that line. Children haven't learned that measurement yet. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the most important thing that gets said in a building full of careful, measured, calculated adults is the thing that got past all of that because a 7-year-old didn't know she was supposed to filter it. I don't think you know that yet. I wanted to tell you because somebody should. Think about who in your life deserves to hear something true that you have been keeping quiet. Not a complaint, not a demand. Something true and good and overdue. Maybe it's someone who has been showing up in your life the way Daniel showed up in that building, reliably, quietly, without requiring you to notice. Maybe it's someone who has been carrying something in the jaw, and the eyes the way people carry the weight they've decided not to ask anyone to share. Maybe it's someone who brings home small, beautiful things instead of complaints, and you have never once told them that you notice. Say it. You don't need a crayon. You don't need to fold it and write important on the outside, though honestly that wouldn't hurt. You just need to decide that somebody should say it. And that somebody is you. If this story stayed with you, share it with 5 people who need to hear it today, not tomorrow. Today. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep coming back to the places where real things happen. And leave me a comment. Tell me about someone in your life who deserves to be seen. I read every single one. What story should we tell next?